It's a funny thing. We live in an environment where you really don't know what's real. A lot of us presume that we do. Think we know things and that we know what is real, but the fact of the matter is that everything that we think is real, everything that we think we know, is mediated through other processes and therefore subject to being influenced in one way or another. We've talked a little bit about this before, in that everything you know about what's going on outside of your local area where you can see is all comes through the media, or from somebody else, all of which becomes then subjective in one way or another and subject to being influenced. And so you really don't know one when you look at the mainline media, or any media for that matter, exactly what is true, because everyone has an agenda of one sort or another, or at least a perspective. Three or four people standing on a corner can watch a car accident and all have different ideas and different descriptions about what happened because they see it from a different point of view. And so there is no objective reality in that regard. It's complicated by the fact that everything in this universe is electric. We live in an electric universe. And what that means is that it's all engineerable. But let me explain it to you. All of your body is made up essentially of electrical charges of one sort or another. When you get yourself down to electrons and protons and so on, they are electric charges, positive, negative, neutral, and everything else built on top of that, the aggregations, the molecules, and elements, all of those things are electrical. And that means that your whole body is made up of electricity, electrical configurations in one way or another, waveforms in an underlying field that supports this reality, 0-point energy field, or whatever you want to call it. And what that means in practical terms is that it is hackable. I mean, my degree is in electrical engineering, and I know that you can engineer electrical things. You can make it come in on one thing and play with it and make it turn out and come out the other side. I mean, that's how television or the internet or radio or anything works, is that it comes in one form, it gets transmuted into something else, and it goes out the other side. And as you know, just in those kinds of terms, that your reception of a radio, or even not so much the internet these days, but certainly when things get cached and you lose sync, you drop sync, your reception, the output isn't always what the input was, to say nothing about where the accuracy was by the person who was putting the information in the front end. So the whole thing is very subjective, and becomes even more so when you consider some of the advanced technologies and capabilities that have been developed, particularly in the intelligence community, most notably the MK Ultra program. There's a lot been written about how, starting in the 50s, if not earlier, they was doing lots of experiments to try to find out how consciousness worked and how the mind worked and how you could influence and shape it and so on. And so they literally got to the place where they could fragment someone's mind into pieces such that one piece could do something, i.e., like kill somebody or shoot somebody or do something, and the rest of the mind, and then it shuts off after the event, and and the rest of the person would have no indication at all that they had done anything like that. They would swear they hadn't done anything. They'd have no knowledge of it at all. And then famously, there's been any of a number of situations where, and the technology is fairly well understood, or at least talked about, is the ability to project information into your mind, voices, ideas, other such things at a distance. And so, where you might think that what you're thinking is what you are thinking, rather than it's an external kind of source of information, it could well be that it comes from something else, which then brings me to ask the question, where do ideas come from? When I had a bunch of kids working for me at the Arlington Institute years ago, I used to always, one of my kind of pet phrases was, where do ideas come from? Do you think they just show up in the meat between your ears? They just kind of happen? I doubt it. As a matter of fact, there's good reasons to believe it doesn't. In fact, it doesn't. They come from somewhere else. Influenced in part, certainly, by your experiences and knowledge and so on, but nobody knows where ideas come from exactly. But there's good reason to believe that they come from other intelligences, like all the religions all talk about angels and praying and other kinds of things to be able to influence the reality in this three-dimensional kind of space from the outside. That then starts to, if you start to run down that rabbit hole a little bit, what you get into is a very interesting kind of situation where you start to say, now, wait a second. If there's life outside of this planet, there are in other dimensions, and they have been around a lot longer than we have. They're really sophisticated. They really know what they're doing, and they really understand how all this energy stuff works, in particular the way how it influences how humans kind of move, come up with ideas or think how they think. Then it's really reasonable to presume that it is, it's engineerable, that they can put ideas into your heads. And all of the little kind of cartoony kind of thing that says there's a devil on one shoulder and an angel on the other shoulder trying to whisper into your ear one thing or another. There's kind of a little kind of more kind of realism to that than one might believe. When you go into some of the ancient literature, like the Gnostic Gospels, the Dead Sea Scrolls and such, they, as well as a whole bunch of other sources, including Native Americans and others, all suggest that there are other dimensional entities, consciousnesses that coexist with us on this plane, in this world, that we cannot see generally, although some of them are shape-shifting and they can show up for relatively short periods of time in this dimension. And that, in fact, that they have really refined and have a very effective ability to engage in your mind, to give you ideas, if you will, or to influence how you think, or make you feel in certain ways, and so on. And if you kind of consider all of that, going all the way from the intelligence community dominating actively for years, the mainline media and in shaping the messages that come out of there. To say nothing about the effects of governments in general to shape and lie and prevaricate and manipulate any and everything that there is that they can for political and other kind of reasons. You've got corporations who are all trying to, I mean, I used to be in the advertising business where you're in the business of trying to use words and shapes and sounds and colors and other kinds of things to get people to change their behavior from what they otherwise would have done. And so I know that being on the back end of this whole of some kind of a business that's trying in lots of different kind of ways to get you to do what they'd like you to do is all very, very possible. And it, you know, on top of that, you've got subliminal kind of messaging that comes in. Movies is where it originally came in, television and such, but it's probably all over the internet and places like that. You got it in music, that where there's subliminal themes and music and ideas that are coming in. I mean, we're flooded with these kinds of efforts from many kind of points of view and many levels of capability to try to influence and change how we see each other and we see ourselves and see the world and understand what's available to us and what our options are. And that's where it's really most important, because what almost everyone is trying to do is convince you. Every other source on the outside is to convince you that you're not as capable as you really are, and that you need their help in one way or another, or you need to capitulate to allow them to deal with the fear and the lack of security and the other kind of fundamental kind of things that humans kind of carry around with them. And what that all turns into, if you really embrace that and you kind of run with that all the time as the filter through which you see and evaluate things. I mean, you never start by saying, well, that must be true, because you just don't know what is true for sure at all. You better start with that and then start to build it and try to work yourself around from multiple sources and try to presume that what you hear from the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post or Google or anything else is true is naive at best. I mean, that is really foolish, because these guys are trying to move you and they're trying to get you. They got a narrative, they got an objective and something that they're doing. And so the whole idea in this whole kind of transition into this new world is to try to find within yourself, through intuition and these non-linear kind of approaches, to be able to access the indications and the messaging that tells you that go to the left or go to the right, or make this decision or not, or trust this person or not, and that is the essence, an essential component of this evolutionary kind of jump, this increase in consciousness, if you will, this awakening, whatever you want to call it. It is to access and find an alternative way of making sense and determining truth and figuring out what you think is real, rather than being dependent upon all of the outside kind of sources. So it's an interesting kind of way in which to it's an orthogonal, it's kind of an angular way to look at things, because you always are tentative in the way you look at things, because you know that somebody's trying to mess with you one way or another, to some degree or another. And that you really need to find within yourself the way to assess these things, rather than decide because of the source or from the outside. So I hope you find that interesting. If you found that helpful and interesting, and you haven't done so already, why don't you just click on the link below and give us your email so that we can send you alerts for the next segments of Postscript. We'd love to be able to tell you beforehand when things are coming downstream so you don't have to go look for them. And this is the best way to do that. We assure you that we won't share your information with anyone else. Thanks.